to the user, the consumer. To reduce glycemic mismatch, you're going to have to eat less sugar and less starches, less starchy foods. I'm not saying you have to go full keto, but less of, the breads, the pastas, the potatoes, the rice, less of that, unless you're very physically active, in which case you can handle those carbs. You're burning them up and using them for fuel. But if you're relatively inactive, then you really have to reduce the glycemic load of your diet. And the glycemic index of the high glycemic index foods as well, because they're associated with all kinds of problems. So those would be things like confectionery and cakes and things like that. The glycemic load, that's more to do with the overall amount of glucose that you're pouring into the bloodstream, not the high levels that spike with things like candy. If you can do that and at the same time take more physical exercise, many other people have shown that you can cure diabetes and you can reverse metabolic syndrome. You can go back to being metabolically normal. And when you do that, the aspects of accelerated aging that are driven by type 2 diabetes or by metabolic syndrome are neutralized. They just disappear. It's one of the most profoundly health-orientated things that you can do. Now, not everybody is going to be able to resist the siren songs of, the candy counter or ice creams or whatever. Low, very significantly low in most micro and phytonutrients. And also in some micronutrients as well. And that may be a term that people aren't so familiar with, but we can get into that if you want. And what that means is that the body is lacking in a lot of the catalysts that it needs to repair and to regenerate and to heal. Now, if you have dysbiosis, if you have chronic inflammatory stress, and that's leading to the progressive disorganization and the destruction of healthy tissue, you want to be able to replace and regenerate and to heal. But you need the cofactors to do that. You don't have those either. So the third pillar of the health protocol is a very broad-based formulation, which is not just vitamins and minerals. On their own, they're not enough. They don't have any effect. But on top of that, they integrate a very comprehensive range of phytonutrients. And on top of that, you've got these 1,3,1,6 beta-glucans, which are micronutrients, otherwise known as PAMPs, pathogen-associated molecular patterns, which help the immune system to function as it should and to defend you against infections. So that's the third driver of disease, and that is the third antidote. So we're relatively inactive, typical urban or metropolitan person who's a white-collar occupation. It's getting by at about 2,000 kilocalories a day. If you go back to the mid-Victorian era, which is a period that I've studied and published papers on, levels of physical activity then were much higher because labor was blue-collar. Since then, we've had the internal combustion engine and information technology. And we don't, as a rule, work with our backs and with our hands anymore. We sit on our asses and we sit in front of a keyboard. Our fingers are very, very well developed. The muscles in our fingers are well developed, but that's it. So what that means is we're eating very small amounts of food compared to about a third of what we used to eat 150 years ago. That's how far our appetites and our food intakes have declined. But because we're eating a lot of empty calories and because we're so physically inactive, that's enough to make so many of us overweight. It's this paradox. We look as if we're well nourished. Internally, we're very badly nourished. So there were no ultra-processed foods. There were processed foods like bread, butter, and cheese, but no ultra-processed foods. So people back in the day were eating produce, what they could grow or raise or hunt or fish. And that was what it was. So we ended up in a population today eat a range of different fibers. And the reason for that is that different fibers ferment at different rates. So very short-chain fibers, such as fructooligosaccharides, or GOS, for example, FOS or GOS, and there's others, they ferment, and during the fermentation, they're fueling the probiotic species, okay? But that's all happening in the ascending colon. It happens very quickly. Which means two things. These very short chain, very rapidly fermenting prebiotic fibers are pretty much gone by the time the probiotic species reach the top of the ascending colon. So now you've got a bunch of probiotic species, but there's nothing for them to eat. So what they then do, unfortunately, they have different metabolic portfolios. They switch on another set of enzymes and start digesting other compounds instead, producing metabolites which are not very good for us at all. So what you need to do is to provide a blend of different fibers, which a traditional diet always did, by the way, which will sustain the growth and the development of these probiotic species throughout the ascending, transverse, and descending colon, and then past the flexure and into the colorectal space. And that's important because if any oncologist will tell you the frequency of colonic tumors increases as you progress distally, and you want to include a healthy microbiota throughout. This not only causes chronic inflammatory stress inside the gut, which is very directly related to IBS and IBD, both of which are on a tear, by the way. But you also end up, if you have sufficient chronic inflammatory stress inside the large bowel, you have a breakdown in colonic epithelial barrier function, leading to the translocation of macromolecules and enteric microbes into the portal circulation. And that was shown back in 2018. It's exactly why we see so much autoimmune disease, because bacteria, which we can deal with very happily when they're in the gut, once they've migrated into the rest of the body and hidden themselves inside cells, for example, in the thyroid, or in the pancreas, or in the synovia of your joints, the immune system can't get at them. But the cells in those tissues are expressing fragments of these pathogens, these microbes on their surface. The immune system can recognize that. And so it will try and attack the target cells that are expressing these foreign antigens. And that leads absolutely directly to what we call autoimmune disease. Now, there's other factors going on here as well. Swallow them, they become separated from the omega-3s, which now break down into some really nasty compounds, such as the nonanols. And these are arrhythmogenic. So yeah, if you take these badly designed commercial fish oil products, it probably does increase the risk of atrial fibrillation. This is, it's been bad biochemistry, really from the start. This has been a bit of a disaster. If you eat oily fish, that doesn't increase your risk of atrial fibrillation at all. It's protective, highly protective. So, this is another example of the supplement industry aping its big brother, the pharmaceutical industry, and thinking in terms of magic bullets. Nutrition is not about magic bullets. It's not about military metaphors at all. It is about providing complex, comprehensive metabolic support systems. And the first and one of the clearest examples of this is in using this combination of omega-3s and amphiphal polyphenols from seaweeds or from olives. They're very similar. And there you can see, first of all, we can drop the 6:3 ratios in your tissues way below anything you can achieve with a commercial fish oil. But secondly, because the polyphenols are anti-inflammatory as well, and have an anti-inflammatory mechanism that complements that of the omega-3s, you have a much more effective, in fact, you have an effective anti-inflammatory input. So one driver, one antidote. Dysbiosis, another graceful. They're selling false hopes and making huge money off the back of people who are frightened. Every single major study, and all the studies that have been done, in fact, so far, show that the commercial fish oils are singularly unhelpful in reducing the risk of cardiovascular, oncological, ophthalmological, and a whole range of other conditions. They simply don't work. Why is that when oily fish has been shown repeatedly to be extremely good at reducing the risk of major adverse cardiovascular events, for example, and reducing premature mortality? Because oily fish contains the omega-3s, but also these amphiphal polyphenols. You absolutely need the two of those things together. When the fish oil industry cleaned and bleached and deodorized and purified the fish oil from whichever fish stock they were working with, they threw the polyphenols out. They ended up with the omega-3 highly unsaturated fatty acids, and on their own they don't work. They don't get to where they're going. In fact, they've been identified as being risk factors for developing atrial fibrillation. And why is that? We're getting into some sort of side issues here, but they're important. If you're using fish oil from which the polyphenols have been removed, you have to protect these fragile molecules. And what industry does, typically it'll add vitamin E or ascorbyl succinate or astaxanthin, something like that. But these are not the nature's chaperones. They don't stick very well to the omega-3s, your genes. It's actually in the vast majority of cases, about 90%, it's environmental factors. So we have to change the environment. And I think what our new understanding of these drivers of disease has given us is the ability to develop very specific antidotes to neutralize those drivers and prevent them from making the disease, from fueling the disease and getting it to the point where it's no longer preclinical, but it's burst to the surface and is now causing symptoms. So chronic inflammatory stress we can treat very effectively, very easily, and very safely with pharmaceuticals, really. And for most doctors, that is still the case because the medical school curricula are, to a surprising extent, influenced by the major donors of funding to the medical institutions. And these are, of course, the pharmaceutical companies. They have no interest whatsoever in teaching doctors about nutrition. All of that is true. Until quite recently, doctors haven't known very much about how to switch off chronic inflammatory stress. They use NSAIDs, which switch off inflammation, steroids, but these are drugs which are fraught with problems. You can't use them long-term, and you can't use them prophylactically. If you use this combination of the omega-3s and the amphiphile polyphenols, it is extremely good at, first of all, these are very safe, highly effective, and they're not expensive, which make them ideal from a public health perspective. I mean, you cannot use pharmaceuticals in public health terms preventatively. You simply can't do that. Nor can you actually identify those people who are most at risk, people who've done polygenic risk scoring, for example, for CV diseases. Big studies have gone into that, trying to identify who's going to be most at risk so that you can treat them prophylactically going forward. So to stop chronic inflammatory stress, you need a combination of omega-3, highly unsaturated fatty acids. But they don't work unless you combine them with amphiphilic polyphenols, and this is a combination you find in oily fish such as herring or mackerel, but you also find it in the balance oils, which are designed to reproduce the metabolic and health benefits of oily fish, which have been confirmed again and again and again, where fish oils have been shown, commercial fish oils have been shown to be ineffective. So you can switch off chronic inflammatory stress very quickly and very easily and very effectively with that approach.
So people are
physically inactive compared to where we were even 3 or 4 generations ago. That sugar is piling up in the bloodstream. There's too much of it to be taken up by the liver. The liver tries to, but it ends up going down the road towards fatty liver disease, which is now very, very common. And as that sugar, that glycemic stress, builds up in the bloodstream, you move towards metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. And this is so common now that I think in the United States, only about 7% of the population have what is considered to be cardiometabolic fitness. I mean, the more than 90% of the population here is now compromised in a way which is going to be absolutely harmful for them over the long term. I mean,
so these 4 drugs...
Or immune defense, amongst other things. But if you have a substantial dysbiosis in the colon, that has a ripple effect, and it affects the microbial populations, the very specific microbial populations in all your other tissues, and that seems to be very bad for you in the long term as well. So chronic inflammatory stress, dysbiosis. The third is something called type B malnutrition. And that is, even when we're getting lots and lots of calories, it turns out because so many of the calories today we eat are empty, they're sugars, starches, plant oils, we end up very, very low, not deficient, but depleted in a lot of what we call vitamins, what the Yankees call vitamins, and also trace elements or minerals. And then thirdly, a range of phytonutrients, including carotenoids, xanthophylls, polyphenols are the best known, but there's a group of alkaloids which appear to be quite important, isothiocyanates and glucosinolates, they're important too. And there's a whole range of other compounds which are very important for our long-term health, which we used to consume, and which have been almost entirely removed from these modern ultra-processed foods. And that makes the effects of chronic inflammatory stress and dysbiosis worse. And then the final key driver, there's minor drivers, but these are the big 4, is something called glycemic mismatch, where we're pouring much too much sugar into the bloodstream from the sugars and the carbs that you eat.
So when the Danish physiologists Bang and Duerberg first went up to Greenland, studied the Inuits, looked at their diet, and wondered what was protecting them, they thought that omega-3s were a part of this, and they were half right, but totally wrong. Because what protected the Inuits, what creates this anti-inflammatory condition, is the combination of the omega-3s and the fat-soluble polyphenols. It's a binary weapon. And by taking just one of those ingredients, you don't really achieve very much. What Balance Oil does, it restores those polyphenols. And now you have something that is not really a fish oil, it's more like oily fish. The other oils don't have the polyphenols, they add vitamin E or some other kind of nonsense like that. It's totally ineffective. It's not the right combination. In nature, you never find these long-chain omega-3s on their own. They're always combined with these lipid-soluble polyphenols. They go together. They lock together. They march in lockstep. And that's what the Zinzino products do. They put them back together, and the combination is so much more effective than the sum of its parts. True synergy.